Thank you everyone for coming. I realize that I am what's standing between you and lunch, so I will try to make this quick and painless as possible. Yes, it's an interesting title. I hope it's a little bit mysterious. If you haven't read the abstract, you're probably thinking, what is this going to be about? So before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about me. As Kristen mentioned, I am a cancer prevention fellow. I work at the National Cancer Institute. I'm also co-chair at a nonprofit called FAES, Foundation for Advanced Education in the Sciences. That's where I teach an Intro to Python course. You can find out more about me at my website. The URL is right there. And if you want to know what I'm up to on a daily basis, sometimes hourly basis, you can follow me on Twitter. And I'll put the link to these slides up on Twitter. I already put them on speaker deck, but some of the images didn't make it. So I'm going to try to get a better link together. Okay? All right. So where does the title of the talk come from? It's inspired by a tweet, which you can see here, by Philip Guo. In the summer of 2018, we had the first great notebook war. All right. This is a reference to Jupyter notebooks, which I'm sure many of you know and love. Let's maybe do a quick show of hands. Who loves Jupyter notebooks? Wow, I guess that's why you're here, okay? That was 85%, definitely the majority of people here. I will try not to say anything bad about notebooks so I don't get beat up after the talk, or maybe during the talk. At the bottom here, you can see there's a guy named Hadley Wickham. Who knows Hadley Wickham? All right, probably R users. Okay, he's probably the most famous R programmer in the world. So he started a kind of a R ecosystem called the Tidyverse, if you're familiar with that. But basically, he says this great notebook war. It's kind of like the spaces versus tabs of data science. And what's that? Well, some people like to have spaces in their code. Other people like to use tabs. It's one of those things that people like to argue over endlessly, kind of like the text editors of the olden days, Emacs versus Vim. This is a GIF made from a scene from the show Silicon Valley, which is on HBO. Basically here, there's an argument that starts about spaces versus tabs, and then it gets into text editors, and it blows up basically, right? So I'm not here to start a religious war or anything like that. Just going to talk about how this kind of notebook war started. What are the tools that are available for dealing with some of the limitations of notebooks, and how we can all enjoy notebooks and have fun. Okay. So a quick thing about spaces versus tabs. My personal preference is, you can set up your code editor, whatever it is. I like PyCharm. Just have tab be equal to 4 spaces, and that's my personal preference. But when you're editing a make file, if you want to use GNU Make for automation, you have to use tabs there. So it's not, I think this debate is definitely not settled, though, as you can see here, if you're a developer that uses spaces, shown here in red, you will earn more money. I mean, on average, right? But potentially, we can try this as an experiment. If you use tabs right now, switch to spaces, and then ask for a raise, okay? Immediately afterwards, okay? All right. So there are some people who use both. I don't know. I guess I would say in a make file that makes sense. But otherwise, if you have a single code file where you use both, I don't know if anyone's going to be able to defend that. Anyway, so notebooks. I'm going to focus on Jupyter notebooks. There are other types of computational notebooks. I don't know anything about them. I've never used Apache Zeppelin or any of the other options I hear about. I've used Jupyter Notebooks quite extensively. It seems like the majority of people have as well. But just really quick, some background. Jupyter Notebooks are data science tools. They're built on IPython. You can combine markdown text with code. It can be Python code. It can be R code. There are many different kernels, so you can mix and match languages, actually. And also the output from the code. The goal is really to enable literate programming and help data scientists communicate their goals, methods, and results, right? And they're widely used all over the place. This image here is from a blog post by Netflix showing how they run notebooks like scripts. So they can kind of pass parameters to the scripts and get different, pass parameters to the notebooks and then get different notebooks for each parameter kind of that they pass. So they're basically using notebooks in a pipeline, right? Which, again, I don't know much about. I mostly use scripts. I think this is fascinating. This could be the future. Okay? So something to watch. All right. Now, so there's a guy named Joel Gruss who doesn't like notebooks. Okay? And he was very vocal about this on Twitter. And this was picked up by the organizers of JupyterCon 2018, and they invited him to give a talk about how he didn't like Jupyter Notebooks at JupyterCon. This is just about the coolest thing I can imagine. If you really, really, really hate something, you know, you might be invited to their conference, right? You know, it can happen. There are links to the slides and the video here. The main takeaway points from this, I would say, is that Joel is emphasizing good software development, software engineering principles and practices, which he says you can't really do in a Jupyter notebook. Okay, and I would just pull out kind of a main word, modularity, from his talk, and I'll talk a little bit about modules at the end, and code reusability. So Joel also doesn't like vertical slides, and I was thinking about making my slides in Reveal.js and just like having everything be vertical slides just to troll him. Just go like, you know, using the down arrow constantly for, you know, or sometimes like mixing and matching between the two. Right? Okay, so Tim, who's here in the back, I spoke to him earlier. He has a talk where he talks about how he likes notebooks, and that's also fine. And the link to the talk is here in the title. And I just think this little exchange on Twitter was fairly brilliant. You know, so this talk right here you can see is 15 slides long. The I don't like notebooks talk was very long, maybe not 150 slides, but it was long. And then this line, I find its brevity its most compelling aspect, is like a wicked burn. So you can see this notebook war is escalating fast, getting out of hand, right? Okay. It was also mentioned on the Data Frame podcast by Hugo Bohn Anderson, who works at DataCamp. It's on episode 44 with Brian Granger, who's kind of one of the people really pushing forward the Jupyter project. He's one of the architects of Jupyter Lab, which is an integrated development environment, which is really cool. And I think will eventually replace, or definitely will replace, the classical Jupyter notebook, and has a lot of features that many people probably don't know about. For example, you can have a text editor in there. You can even have like a Vim kind of based text editor there. You can set up a Python console or a terminal and have a REPL where you send code to the console from a script, right? So these are kind of awesome things about Jupyter Lab that I think maybe most people don't know. It's not just for notebooks. Okay. Another response as part of this notebook war, there's a guy named Yihui Xie, how many people know who that is, right? Okay, so a few of the R people, not too many. He's a software developer who made R packages like R Markdown, Knitter. He's very famous for that in the R community, right? So he has a blog post where he talks about that a lot of the problems with Jupyter notebooks are just not present in the R world because they use R Markdown. Okay? And just so you know, R Markdown supports Python. So if you wanted to make docs, basically a document or slides using R Markdown, you could totally do that. Putting Python code in there, it'll work. Right? So there is something called an R notebook, but it's just another output format. It's kind of like making an HTML document, right? So it's not anything special. It doesn't really change anything in terms of the content. It's just an output format, right? In the RStudio IDE, it'll just change the knit button to a preview button, okay? And some people don't like that, but that's like the one thing people can complain about, because otherwise they're not any different, okay? A great thing about this, R Markdown, it's a plain text file, whereas Jupyter Notebooks, if you look at them raw, it's basically JSON format, which is hard to read. Doesn't work great for version control when you're looking at diffs, but R Markdown does not have that problem, right? And it's very powerful and very well supported. Okay? So all these people talking smack about notebooks, why should we use them? I think the number one thing is literate programming, where you're combining code, text, and output all in one document. It's easy to read, easy to digest, and they can be very powerful. Right? You can make slides, you can make PDFs, you can make HTML documents from your notebooks. You can host them online. They can be rendered by GitHub and the NB Viewer. You can also run them in your browser using a tool called Google Collaboratory or Colab, and that will give you also access to free GPU. Anyone who's doing machine learning or deep learning, I'll say that again, free GPU in your browser, okay? And also Google's new thing, TPU, so like a tensor processing. So okay, that's like the next level. It's like a super GPU. So that's something I think that's very valuable. Oh, and then when you use Colab, you can have version control through Google Drive, okay, on your notebook. So that is another huge selling point. Who's used Kaggle here? Okay, I'd say at least half, probably closer to 60%. So Kaggle kernels, if you want to share your work with someone, it's in the form of a Jupyter notebook most often. And that is also a wonderful platform. I really like Binder. Okay? With Binder, you can just go to their site, the link's right here, and you can put in the link to a GitHub repo, and it'll create a computational environment in your browser where you can run the code that's in the GitHub repo and use the resources that's in the GitHub repo. I use this all the time for classes. We saw this during the tutorials for the Dask tutorial. If you missed it, that was, you just click the Launch Binder button and you have that computational environment ready in your browser. And it works through classical notebooks or JupyterLab. Or if you're an R person, you can also set it up to open up with RStudio. Okay? So pretty awesome stuff. Okay? Some more notebook tools. There is a version control tool specifically for notebooks. It's called NBDime. Okay? That might be useful if you love writing code in notebooks. Okay? There's also a way that you can, well, several ways that you can not write code in notebooks, but have your code in notebooks. Okay? So for example, there's a tool called Jupytext, and this GIF down here is showing how it works. You work in a script that's paired with a Jupyter notebook, and when whatever you write in the script will be updated in the notebook. Okay? This is a tool that's fairly new, but it's exploded. You can look on GitHub. It has way more stars than any of these other packages, which are some of which this Notedown has been around longer for sure. So Notedown, what does that do? It allows you to convert Jupyter Notebook files to Markdown and back, basically, right? And as part of this, you can configure your Jupyter Notebooks to open up, okay, so basically open up Markdown files as Jupyter Notebooks. So instead of using the .ipynb extension, it'll use .markdown, right? Which is pretty cool if you want to go to something that's you know, a commonly used format, and you can run everything just the same, but using Markdown instead of ipynb. Okay? So final tool, this is a Python package that I wrote, actually. So it has like 0 stars on GitHub, and it's, you know, no one knows about it. But basically what you can do is you can kind of concatenate Markdown files and scripts and to make a notebook. And then you can also run it in one go. So you put all of these kind of source files together, and you can also have kind of like a raw notebook which hasn't been run, and then one with all of the output. Okay? But down here, this is Jupytext, which I think is probably the best solution if you want to work in a script, but also have a notebook, right? But the major plug I'll make, going back to Joel's talk, is, you know, write modules, right? You know, modules kind of follow a standard structure. Everyone knows how, well, everyone should know how they look. You have your imports. There's an order to the imports. You'll have your definitions, classes, and functions. I went to Stephen Lott's great tutorial yesterday. You can see there's a video, I think from 2 years ago, which is a similar talk. It was the 5 types of Python functions, even though in the talk it was kind of like there are 6 actually, but 7, but no, not really. There are just 5, right? Stephen Lott also talked about type hints, which I think, you know, everyone should use. This helps if you're using PyCharm, for example. It'll help your IDE help you, right? When you put type hints into your function and class definitions, this is something that travels with the functions and classes. It's accessible in the Dunder annotations attribute, and it's something that's very helpful for other people reading your code, right? And similarly with docstrings. Docstrings also travel with your functions and classes wherever they go. And when you run the help function on a function or a class, it'll show you the type hints and the docstrings. Okay, and the docstring. The docstring is in the Dunder doc attribute. Okay? So those are kind of like how you define your classes. At the bottom, what you should have is this if name equals main guard. Basically, this keeps your module from being, you know, anything that's at the bottom, it'll keep it from being run unless the module is being run as a script. Okay, so basically this kind of lets you do have kind of double functionality for a single file. You can import the file as a module, and you can run it as a script. Okay? And one cool use for this is if you don't ever think you're going to be running this module as a script, is to just put in there doctest.testmod. So this function call right here, and then you can run doctest on that module, and it will check all of the examples in your docstring for you, okay, and give you the output. So, you know, this example failed, this one passed, right? It's highly useful. It's a very easy way to get started with testing, right? But the other thing, you know, modules and testing, I think, kind of go hand in hand. When you're writing modules, you should write tests for them. If you don't want to write tests, at least put examples in your docstring, in your docstrings. Then you can use the unit test API to kind of extract those examples into tests that will be in a unit test suite, right? And you can run that test suite with unit test or PyTest, whatever is your preferred test runner. Okay? And then the last couple points, use cookie cutter templates to set up a project structure. If you're working on a team, agree on a cookie cutter template that works for the most, if not all, of your teammates, right? And use the things, kind of leverage that structure, the things that are included in there to have a good project that you'll when you look back 6 months or a year ahead, you look back on it, you'll be proud that you were following good principles throughout the time you were working on that project, right? Final thing, deploy your projects to PyPI, right? This is great for sharing code. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful experience. You can then brag about it. Hey, you can pip install my Python package, right? And it's really wonderful for sharing code, for getting feedback on your code, for making the work that you've done accessible to everyone. Okay? With that, I'll say thanks for listening and take any questions you have. Yes. Oh, maybe wait for the mic.
I can't remember the last time I tried it. It was months ago to develop Jupyter notebooks in PyCharm, but it didn't feel good, or I don't really remember having an experience about it.
Yeah.
And as so I'll probably revisit that because it seems like it's been bumped up in terms of support there. But as someone who's extremely loyal to PyCharm, it sounds like maybe you were too.
Yes, definitely.
I don't remember what you mentioned, the IDE for Jupyter.
Yes.
In particular, how does that fit into your tool stack? And
yeah.
Is it complementary, or is it whenever you're doing Jupyter notebooks, are you just going to ditch PyCharm?
That's a great question. So the question was basically, you had the mic, so I'm not going to repeat it. I do love PyCharm. That is certainly true. I prefer working in PyCharm over Jupyter Lab. So I'm not ready to ditch PyCharm anytime soon or ever. But the support for Jupyter Notebooks in PyCharm is better. It doesn't have any of the kind of shortcuts that I'm used to from when I used to use Jupyter Notebooks a lot. So if you use Jupyter Notebooks, the experience in PyCharm is going to be different. The keyboard shortcuts are different. I use it mostly for viewing notebooks. It's a nice way to view notebooks or just run code in the same environment where you write your scripts. Okay? That being said, in Jupyter Lab, you can do the same thing. You can write scripts, write modules, and of course, it has excellent support for Jupyter Notebooks, right? As part of the Project Jupyter. Right? Yeah.
So just in that same vein, have you followed data lore from JetBrains, sort of a Jupyter, a closed source Jupyter clone that made by PyCharm developers?
I have not heard of data lore. I think that's another one of those computational notebooks that I just have not played around with. But have you tried it?
I signed up for the beta. It's not completely released, but it's a product that JetBrains is trying to sell.
Yeah.
I think really between PyCharm and Jupyter, that seems like a natural middle ground.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I'll look into it. I'm a fan of JetBrains, obviously. I think they make great IDEs, not just PyCharm. Yeah. Okay, I'll ask a question, right? Who here has changed their mind about notebooks after listening to this talk? 0 people. Everyone is, everyone is die-hard whatever they believed previously, right? Okay, well, I didn't change any minds. Who is excited about trying out at least one of the tools that I talked about? Okay. All right, that's good. Yeah, I would say at least 80%. I can maybe round up to 90%. Sure, why not? Okay. All right, well, thanks so much, everyone.